Okay, so this is my PD2 final project where I'll be going over the things that I have observed and learned during my observations. And my name is Alex Hart, so here we go. I want to start off by first talking a little bit about my placement. I was placed at Huckabee ISD, and the teacher that I was observing and student teaching with was Miss Kathy Sherrard. She has taught for 15 years. She told me teaching wasn't her first calling. She did nursing at first, and then with other things going on in her life, she decided she needed something that was more routine and she could have time with her husband because he was becoming ill. So she decided to go back to school. She went to Tarleton to do teaching through teammate. And so the subject and grade that I was observing and working with was 5th and 7th grade math. I was very grateful to get to work with the math students because that's what I plan on teaching, and so I absolutely adored being in there with them and getting to see them learn math and everything. But I spent most of my time with the 7th grade math class. They had class for an hour and 15 minutes, I believe, or an hour and 25 minutes, but I spent majority of my time with the 7th graders. And then I spent the rest of the time with the 5th graders. Partial of the time they were doing for 10 minutes. They didn't recess, and the rest of the time they were back in class. But it was fun to see the different age levels just for 2 years. 7th graders, they were how much they had advanced in math compared to the 5th graders, and how much the 5th graders had actually were able to, how much the 5th graders actually knew and comprehended in math. So moving on, we're going to talk about Miss Sherrard's lesson planning. How did Miss Sherrard lesson plan? As far as collaboration goes, she was the only math teacher on her grade level. There were older math teachers and there were younger math teachers, but the younger math teachers, because she taught 4th through 7th, were the contained classes. So like you had teachers teaching grade levels, not just solely teaching a subject. And so there wasn't much collaboration as far as I was able to tell. She wasn't saying that, oh, the teachers are saying that you guys aren't learning this and that you guys didn't learn this. But I do know there was some discussion while I was sitting in her classroom. She was telling the kids that they were going to have to know a certain topic in order to be successful in the 8th grade. That's what she told her 7th grade class. So she does know about subthermial learning and doing within the grade levels above, but she didn't say much about if she was working with the 8th grade math teacher and the Algebra 1 math teacher to see like what all she needed to prepare them, I would say. Also about the TEKS, she never discussed the TEKS with the students. The TEKS were not unpacked either. She never wrote down a TEK on the board for her where she had what they were going to do for the day. She had like sections in their textbook that they were going to go over. So for example, instead of having, TEK, Math TEK 6A doing this, it was more like textbook this, chapter 4-3, chapter 4, section 3. That's how she would, I guess, lesson plan or display her lesson planning. I didn't really agree with it because I never had an idea whenever I looked at that what she was doing. It made sense to her, but if someone else was to come in there from, I guess, the state, you would say, it wouldn't be obvious that what she was teaching. I'm continuing. As far as activities, how did she plan them in her classroom? There was never an activity observed while I was there. The kids got packets and they sat down and they worked on these packets the whole class period. She would go over the first part of the packet, which was like example problems of what the kids were expected to do for homework, and the other half of the packet. But there was never an activity observed. The only time that I got to witness a kids do an activity was during my micro teach. And we got to do hands-on stuff, and they did group work. they really seemed to enjoy it, but there was never any activities in her class. Moving on to lesson delivery. Miss Sherrard, she would open her lessons by having the students go grab their packets for the day. They knew where their packets were, and they knew what to do. It was a procedure. They knew how to do it. There wasn't anything like saying, oh, today we're going to go over this, and we're going to talk about this. It was just, go get your packets, and let's get started. That's as far as it ever really went. How did she introduce her lessons? It was just like, here it is. Get your packet. Let's start on problem 1, and she'll read problem 1. The objectives were never clearly stated. The students probably couldn't tell you what they were doing. There were times when I was in the classroom and she would, for example, the students were working on a packet that had to do with something they learned the previous day, and the student had asked Ms. Sherrard what's a histogram. And she was like, we went over histograms yesterday. Don't you remember? And the student was like, no, I don't know what a histogram is. So I take it as she probably taught them the lesson, but probably didn't teach them what it was. So she said, here's how you do this, and this is why you're going to do it. But she didn't say, this is a histogram. A histogram is like this. So the students really were never really sure what things were called. I think this could have been improved by having guiding questions and focus questions, because they were never stated. If she would say, the guiding question today is, how can I use this information to create a histogram? The students would be able to understand what they're doing, why they're doing it, and how they're doing it. But because questions were never asked in the classroom, they were kind of like on their own. Lesson delivery continued. Ms. Sherrard's students were kind of 50-50 participating. The 50 that were participating were the ones who were actively listening, asking questions, giving Ms. Sherrard feedback, and the other 50% of the class were either not participating directly in the lesson that's going on. They would either be working ahead because they knew how to do it, or the other part of that percentage was lost and they just were kind of giving up. Like, I'm not going to work on this. It's just not going to happen. But Ms. Sherrard would check the students for understanding. She would ask the students that she knew were struggling, to see if they were following along, if they had any questions. But she would also call the ones who were strong, because she had to make sure that they were following along, because they would go ahead. So it's kind of a balance of knowing where your students are at and knowing who needs to be called to make sure they have the understanding of what you're teaching, and knowing that, I need to call the student to make sure that they're paying attention, they're following along, they're not just moving ahead too fast. As far as assessment goes with Ms. Sherrard, assessment is the process for gathering information about your students that will help teachers learn more about the student's strengths and weaknesses, and to help them decide where they go from there. Ms. Sherrard utilizes assessments in her classroom as a checking for understanding. Ms. Sherrard conducted assessments in her classroom in an odd manner, I would say. She used a lot of formative assessments daily. I would consider the package she gave the kids formative assessments. She would walk them through the first half of the packet together as a class, and the other half of the packet was their homework. Technically, they're supposed to go home, do it, and she'll bring it back and she'll grade it. It's a formative assessment. It's where she can see if they understood the material that they were just taught with, and seeing where does she need to make improvements on. They did this on a daily, but because most of them finished in class super fast, they never took it home. So she would just kind of grade it right then and there, and she wouldn't really help them per se. She would kind of show them how to get the answer. So I really don't think it was effective, honestly. Summative assessments, I never observed one, so I don't know how they were conducted. But the 5th grade class at one point, it was my first days there. The 5th grade class at one point, they were going to take an assessment, and 2 of the students were feeling ill, and she had them she would tell them they didn't have to take the test because they weren't feeling well. I thought that was kind of odd because one student did it and then the other student said he didn't feel well, but then the third student tried it, it didn't work. So that's kind of like, where do you draw the line of who's assessing and who's not? But anyway, that's besides the point. That was the only time I ever heard mention of a test in her class. So the effectiveness of her assignments, I kind of hit this a little bit. They really weren't, in the second class, they really weren't effective because the students knew that if they finished their homework in class that they could get on their phones and they didn't have to do it as homework. So they kind of rushed through it. I know they sometimes work together. You're not seeing who knows what. And the way Miss Sherrard did it, she would help them get the answer. They came to her and said that they didn't know how to do it. When they were students, I knew they knew how to do it. They just didn't want to do it because they knew Miss Sherrard would give them the answer. So whenever they did this, and the students came to her, there were some students who really did need the help. When they came to her, Miss Sherrard would just kind of give them the answer a little bit. But there was no, from those daily formative assessments, Miss Sherrard never collected data from them. She just said, okay, put your name and put it in the box, and I'll put a grade on it later. She didn't see what is the student not getting. It was just like, finish it and you did your homework and have a good day. There wasn't any growth that was coming from it. Moving on to classroom management. Classroom management is defined as the method and strategy an educator uses to maintain a classroom environment that is conducive to student success and learning. That's according to education.gov. So what makes a class well managed? If you were to ask Mr. Rory, which I did, she told me that implementing rules. The students need to know what lines they can cross and what lines that they can't cross. If you don't clearly state that, you're not going to have classroom measures. Like, students won't know how far they can go without getting in trouble. Like, they're going to want to test the waters. But if you tell them you can't do this, you can't do that, they're not going to cross those lines. You won't ever have a problem if you clearly state your rules and expectations for the students. She said also that having procedures and routines is very beneficial for her classroom management. Her procedures are simple. You come in, you put your stuff down, you come in quietly, put your stuff down, you go grab your mountain math from the back table, you sit down, you do your mountain math. After about 7 minutes, you get started. As a class, you get started on the mountain math. We answer questions. After we finish mountain math, you put your paper away, you get up and you go get your packet for the day. And then we work on our packet together. And you work on the other half by yourself. I grade it, and that's in the class. That's how her routine was. There wasn't any wait time, so the students never had time to just act rowdy. Classroom management was important to Miss Gerard because she was really strict and she knew what she had to teach, and she knew that she had a certain amount of time to teach it. So she knew that if she could get her class to be managed well, that she would have time to do everything that she needed to do in her allotted time. So rule versus procedures. Rule is a principle or regulation governing conduct, actions, and rules. So this is the do's and don'ts, or rules. Procedures are a sequence of actions or how you're supposed to do something. And so Ms. Gerard's rules and procedures consist of not talking when she's talking, not entering the classroom in a loud, disturbing manner, coming in and getting started on your mountain math, and no phones out until all work is completed and graded. So students knew not to get anything out to distract them until they were finished with their work. She didn't really have many rules, but they were just kind of plain and simple. There wasn't much confusion about it. Continued. Ms. Gerard's consequences consist of, if her fifth graders, if they were to misbehave, they knew that they lost their quote-unquote recess time, their 10 minutes. She would make them either walk around the playground by themselves, or she would have them sitting down reading a book. It would depend on the severity of what they did to lose the recess time. Her first thing was always walking laps. She would tell them how many laps to walk during recess.